What's up, nerds? Welcome back. In case you guys haven't noticed, we are firmly in the Christmas season, and to get into the spirit of that, I decided I was going to go ahead and pull out the comic that I always like to read during this time of year, and this year I decided why not go ahead and make a video about it. So today, we're going to be talking about the Batman Adventures Holiday Special. Yes, so as I said, I love reading this comic every year. I have for shit, I don't even know how many years now. I've had it for a few years. Not since I was a kid, but I have had it for a few years, and I love to just pull it out and reread it every year because it's so entertaining. It really takes me back to being a kid, watching the Batman adventures, and especially it takes me back to a time when comics were just fun. You know what I mean? Like all the time they were fun. I have some of the other like DC holiday like anthologies and shit, but they don't really evoke the same feeling I get from this particular book. So, and not only just because it gets me into that like joy of the holiday spirit, but also because there's one story in here in particular, of course it ties into the cover here with Mr. Freeze. That story tugs at the heartstrings every single time I read it. So we're going to go ahead and go through these. I mean, this is somewhat of a thick book, so I'm going to try to go through it kind of quick. But the stories, there are about, I think, what, 4, 5 stories? Something like that. Four. Yeah, there are 4 stories in total. And all of them are just so very well done, but they're also pretty brief, so it should be pretty easy to get through them. But let's stop wasting time and we'll just jump straight into it. Anyway, we start out here with this nice opening shot, just kind of establishing for us this is the Christmas season, time for angels of light and of darkness. So, of course, that's alluding to Batman. But anyway, we see where this starts out, and Batman actually does not appear in this first story aside from that little silhouette we got from him in that first page. But this story mostly focuses around more so Barbara Gordon, Batgirl. So we see where she's at the mall, she's doing some Christmas shopping, and then she looks over and she sees where, because she hears the kid crying, she's like, wow, like I know kids many times are afraid of Santa, but that one must be really afraid. So she looks over and sees that it's actually Harvey Bullock who's there as Santa, and of course he's not doing a very good job of Santa. But she's thinking to herself, oh yeah, that's right, Dad said that there had been like some very bad outbreaks of people looting stores and shit, so that they've been having like some cops undercover, and apparently Harvey is there as Santa and Renee Montoya is there as his like lead elf or whatever. So she's standing there with him, and then Barbara decides, I'm going to go over and just kind of like hang around in case they need any help from Batgirl. So we go back over to where Harvey's like complaining. He's like, this is the lamest stakeout I've ever been on. And Renee's telling him, like, well, at least you get to wear like that warm Santa suit. Like, I'm freezing my buns off here. Because we can see where they have her in like the little Peter Pan type of elf costume, which I mean, even with something like this, like they were still kind of drawing women, somewhat alluring like that. So you can appreciate that anyway. So she hears over her comms like there's nothing really going on just yet, and then we see where Harvey picks up like this little fat kid and he's like, what do you want for Christmas, chubbo? And then he's like telling him, you're not the real Santa Claus. And he's like, sure I am, want to see my gun? So he sits there, he takes up like a few more kids, and then we see where Barbara's walking by and she has this one kid. One thing I do want to point out, because this is something that will happen more than once in this particular thing, when she initially looks over and sees him, I don't know if you can see her. I'm trying not to really mess up the spine here. What you see her right here, she has brown hair for some reason, even though obviously Barbara has red hair. And then on this other page, when she notices one of the kids, she has blonde hair in this panel. So I don't know what was going on with the colorist that they kept getting that wrong in these little establishing scenes, like where if they thought that she was somebody else or something. But anyway. So she's looking around and she says, haven't seen anything suspicious yet. I'm probably wasting my time. And then we see where Harvey has this whole interaction with this one girl where she's asking him, like, Santa, can you please bring back my dad home or whatever? And he's like, what is it he asks her? Where is your pop? And she says, in prison. Because she introduced herself, said, my name is Mary McSweeney. So when she says that her dad is in prison, he's like, oh, your dad is Mad Dog? I mean, Mike McSweeney? And she's like, yes. So he, like, turns to Renee. He's like, oh, poor kid. Like, I sent her dad up the river, like, 3 months ago. So he starts trying to explain to her, like, sorry, kid. Like, there are some things even Santa can't do. And then, not all wishes come true. But he sees her giving, like, the whole puppy dog face. So he's like, ah, hell. So he gives her $50. He's like, here, kid, go buy yourself something nice. And then she asks, like, can I buy something for my dad too? He's like, yeah, as long as it's not a file. Because you remember, like, back in the old cartoons and, like, old movies and shit, they would send, like, people in prison, like, a file so they could file through the bars. So, anyway, he's saying, like, there goes my donut money. So, this is the part where, like I said, the panel with her with blonde hair, she sees this kid stealing a necklace, and she goes up to him. She's like, hold it right there. But then she said, when she's saying young man, his arm detaches, and you can already guess, like, who the villain is. So we cut back over to Harvey, who's fallen asleep because this kid is, like, saying he wants literally every toy under the sun. But that's when they hear, or Renee hears, like, over her comms, that they have, like, a lock on somebody who's, like, stealing shit. So she takes off, and she tells Harvey to wake up. So he kind of does. He snaps out of it, and they both go running after this. And we see them and other cops running after 4 different kids who then come together to form Clayface. So, of course, like I said, when that one kid's arm detached, you could already guess it was going to be Clayface. Anyway, so Barbara goes to the dressing room to go change, and this is one thing that's also very true to life. She's in there, and while she's trying to change, she like sticks her toe on one of those like needles and shit, which is one thing that always used to bother the shit out of me about dressing rooms or like changing rooms, whatever the hell. Like especially in like a mall or whatever, people would always leave those little like pins and needles and shit like on the floor, and it's always carpeted. So I mean, they're in there and you can't really tell. So I've always thought that's very true to life. She like sticks herself with one. Granted, I've never really been barefoot in one of these things, so never had that problem. And I'm always very careful. I'm always very aware of that, especially because I grew up with a grandmother who sews. So I was used to there being needles on the floor and having to like look out for them and shit. Anyway, so she changes, and then when she changes into her Batgirl costume, she was like, that was pretty fast. Like, I'd like to see Robin beat that. Anyway, we see where Clayface is raising hell and shit. He's like, he disables Renee and Harvey's guns and shit like that by just spitting clay at them. And then from there, they kind of like end up going outside where Barbara jumps in, Batgirl jumps in, and crashes him through this window into like the frozen lake. So she's telling everybody like, get out of the area, like he's kind of recovering and shit. And he even tells her like, you know, the frozen water or the cold water is going to slow me down a little bit, but I'll still be able to take care of you and everything like that. So that's when the cops actually come out. And they start trying to shoot at him, which of course it's Clayface, so that doesn't do much of anything. And she's telling them like, no, don't waste your bullets on him, shoot the Santa. To which Harvey, not really understanding, he looks at Renee with like this sad face. He's like, you wouldn't. She's like, no, you idiot, not you. That's Santa up there. So they shoot at the like fake Santa, causing it to go crashing down and electrocutes Clayface. So of course that knocks him out and everything. And then they're saying like, so much for Frosty the lawn cigar. You have a real word with a way with words, Harv. So anyway, he's saying like, well, I guess that wraps up this case. But Renee's telling him like, yeah, not exactly. We still have to recover the evidence. And he's like, oh no. She's like, yeah, that's right. Roll up your sleeves. We're gonna have to go digging into Clayface. So he's like, ho ho frickin' ho. So that's the end of that first story. Just, you know, fun, quick, and like I said, wasn't really Batman. It was actually Batgirl. So I like that. This particular anthology starts out not with a Batman story, but with a Batgirl story. Anyway, now we go over to a Harley and Ivy story. And because this is not 2021 Harley and Ivy, no, they're not going to be spending at least 3 to 4 pages kissing each other. This is back when they were still friends. You know, friends like they've always been. Anyway, we see here where Harley's kind of sitting around moping in her thong, which I hadn't noticed. I don't know why I've never noticed that until this time when I was reading it. I was like, oh yeah, I never noticed. She's just wearing her little thong underwear. It's a choice, and it definitely keeps people's attention. Anyway, so she's like moaning about how Harley and Ivy are kind of like holed up in this dingy little motel and everything. She's like, can't we at least get like a Christmas tree? And of course, Ivy tells her, absolutely not. Besides, aren't you Jewish? So she's like, yeah, but they're so bright and colorful and stuff. So she's like, well, cheer up. I've got a plan that will make this the best Christmas ever. So that's where we go over to Bruce, who's kind of standing here with Veronica. And she's asking him, like, so, what does she ask? Which lucky girl is going to spend the holidays with Gotham's most eligible bachelor? To which he says, actually, I was planning on a quiet Christmas alone. So she's like, really? I wouldn't tell them that. And he asks, like, who's them? So that's where he sees all of these women who are like, you're standing under the mistletoe. So he's like, oh, shit. So he tries to, like, nope out of there. He's like, now, ladies. He's, like, backing up and shit. And then, of course, Poison Ivy comes up and kisses him, which you know what that does when Poison Ivy kisses you. So she does that, and he decides, like, I'm going to go ahead and just get out of here. They're all telling him, like, bye, don't be a stranger and all that shit. So he's like, thought I'd never make it out of there. And then we see where this voice comes from the car saying like, "Hey, would you like a ride?" He's like, "No, no, no, that's okay. I have my own car or whatever." They're like, "Oh, well, we insist." And then all of a sudden he's thinking to himself like, "What the hell? I can't resist. Why am I going towards the car?" But of course, like I said, it's Poison Ivy, so that's why. So they're in the car, he gets in, and then they're saying, "It's like this, sweetie. We're two lonely gals desperate for Yuletide fun. So Ivy zapped you with her special lipstick back at the party. Now we've got Gotham's handsomest, wealthiest bachelor to treat us to a Christmas shopping spree." So that's what they tell, or Harley tells the driver, "Hit it, Jeeves," and we see where he's also been kissed. So he's like, "Yes, ma'am." So he's saying, "You realize, of course, that you are completely under our control and have to obey our every whim." So Bruce is like, "Yes." So they take off and they decide they're going to go to the mall. They're going to take him on a shopping spree because, yeah, if I were able to control a billionaire, I'm not going to lie, I'd probably do the same. Anyway, so they take him over there, and this one guy who's an employee is asking him, like, "Mr. Wade, are you okay? Because, like, your two companions, Poison Ivy basically gives him like a little, I guess, command, and he tells him basically, they're with me, put everything they buy on my account, I'm paying for it. So they just go hog wild, and Harley's saying like, "I'll race you to the shoe department," all that shit. So they go and they start doing all these things. We see where they have a little like montage where they're trying on all these different outfits, they're getting perfume, jewelry, and then they're running around. We can see Bruce is getting more and more pissed as more of his money is being spent. Although I guess I'm assuming it's probably less about the money being spent and more so that he's still being controlled. Anyway, we see this one funny part at the bottom where Harley like points at a tree like, "Hey, shouldn't we get this one?" And Poison Ivy just like, "No," and drags her away. So love that. Anyway, so they keep going on with their whole little thing. They keep going up further and further in this like giant mall and shit. And then they're even saying like, "Look, pianos." And Bruce is saying like, "I've had just about enough of this." So Poison Ivy surmises, "Oh, okay, the effects are starting to wear off on him." She gives Harley the lipstick and says, "Here, give him another like dose or whatever." She's like, "Yeah, no problem." So she goes up and she's like, "Give me some sugar," but he backs up, and we see where this one elevator was out of order, which normally when that's the case, I'm pretty sure they have the doors closed, but that's why they have this little barrier, which he falls over and falls down the like elevator shaft. So of course Harley at first is like freaking out, like, "Oh shit, he fell," and Poison Ivy comes up like, what happened?" So they very quickly put together what happened. They look down like to see if they can see him, and then Harley's like, "We killed him," and then they just kind of look at each other and they're like, "We were gonna do that anyway. Doesn't matter." They just walk away. They're like, "We have his credit cards anyway, so we didn't really need him." But of course, we see where I'm assuming Alfred probably brought the bat suit for him, so he changes. And then we see where they're in a car getting ready to get away with all their ill-gotten gains. And Poison Ivy is asking Harley, like, "So where should we go now?" And Harley says, "Well, wherever, but just wherever is furthest away from that guy." So that's when they realize, oh shit, Batman's after us. So, of course, he pursues them back into the mall. They, like, run into this toy store or whatever. They try to throw a toy at him, and then Poison Ivy is telling him, "Unfortunately, Harley and I are still on the naughty list," because they're saying, like, "I bet you've been a good boy," or whatever. So, they say, "Come on up and get your presents." So, he says, "I have to take it slow. Haven't completely shaken off Ivy's drug." So, as he gets closer to the top, Poison Ivy, like, punches him with this, like, giant boxing glove toy, and then Harley, who earlier on we heard, like, "Aren't you Jewish?" Well, she wishes him a happy Hanukkah and then hits him with a damn hammer. So he falls back down, and then Poison Ivy saying, like, "Oh, gee, Harley, you broke our new toy." So they run away thinking that they've got away, but of course, it's Batman. So he pulls out his grapnel, and then he shoots at the tree and, like, causes it to fall down on them. And then this is where it ends with Poison Ivy saying, like, "There, you got your damn tree. Are you happy now?" And Harley's just like, "Yeah." So that's where that one ends, where he is able to apprehend them using the tree. Now we get to the story that gets me every time. It almost makes me want to tear up every time I read it. So I'm pretty sure I will be able to get through it this time just fine, because I read it earlier, hoping that will kind of like cancel it out. So we'll see. Anyway, so we see this where they're starting out with Batman talking to this doctor who's saying, like, "Yeah, Mr. Freeze, like, he broke out, and it's kind of weird. Like, he was acting even more sullen than he normally is," which, considering it's Mr. Freeze, that's a pretty big accomplishment. And then she's telling him, like, basically, he did seem somewhat different this week, always asking questions about the weather. For some reason, he wouldn't discuss. He kept asking if it would snow by tonight, Christmas Eve. When we told him the weather report said no snow until January, Freeze grew more sullen and depressed than usual, if that's possible. So that's where Batman's saying, like, well, it looks like he found a way to cheer himself up because it's snowing outside. So he takes off and he's saying, like, the police band said an hour ago someone looted the warehouse that held all of Victor Freeze's cryogenic equipment. One of the items taken was an experimental snowmaker. So he kind of gives the quick rundown on how Victor Freeze got his powers. He was working on the whole thing, to like freeze people and who were like terminally ill until a like cure could be found for whatever their ailment was. And he first tested it out on his wife, who had an inoperable form of cancer and all of that. But then when the corporation decided they were going to pull his funding and they weren't going to allow him to continue his research, that he tried to stop them, but he ended up being dosed by the cryogenics. Mr. Freeze's origin. Anyway, so he's saying all of that. With his only reason for living gone, Mr. Freeze now claims to be dead to human emotion. Anyone who'd call down a blizzard like this on Christmas Eve would have to be. So as he's driving through, he sees this one car that's about to hit a mother and daughter who are on the street, like trying to cross the street and shit. So he jumps out, manages to like swing out and save them and shit. And then he's handing the presents back to the little girl, who asks him, like, are you an angel? And of course we get this where he's just like, he doesn't say anything, but it's like very obvious he's trying to say, like, no, I'm not. So the guy's all freaking out, like he's all pissed off, like piece of junk and all of this. So Batman just goes up to him, he's like, get some chains. So the guy's just like, yes sir. So they take off and they're very happy. They're telling him, Merry Christmas or whatever. So he rolls up on this cop car that's completely frozen over, and he pulls out like this torch that he has, and he's saying, like, this thing only has like for a few minutes of charge. Hopefully it's enough, but no, it's not. So he has to pull out a battering and literally break away the ice to get the cop out. So the cop is saying, like, he's over that way in the cemetery, and we see where, yeah, he's in there kind of causing the snow and shit. So he comes up, he tries to like ambush him, but he immediately Freeze swings on him and like hits Batman out of the way, causing him to go flying into conveniently his mother and father's like gravestone. So it knocks down the little wreath that I'm assuming he was the one who put on there, right? Yeah, love Bruce. So it was him, or maybe Alfred was the one who brought it for him. Who knows? Anyway, he sees that it's their grave, so he puts the wreath back on there, and then we see where he's like walking away from it into the snow to try and get to Freeze. He throws some batarangs, kind of like sort of disabling the gun, but Freeze tells him, like, this didn't completely like disable it. I can still try to use it, although it may backfire and it may explode. So he says, but to rid myself of you, I'll take that chance. So he does it, and yeah, like what he said was true. It explodes. So they're both just kind of laying there kind of dazed, but Batman's already starting to get up. And then he goes to like hit him, but he sees where Mr. Freeze isn't trying to like put up any kind of resistance, so he just kind of stops. He's like, look, I'll give you one chance to explain. Why did you do this? On all nights, why did you do this tonight, Freeze? So he points at his wife's gravestone. And this is where he gives the explanation where he says, we were married 10 years ago on a snowy Christmas Eve. Nora loved the snow. I thought it sad that there should be none this year. And I wouldn't want my Nora to be sad tonight. It almost got me. I'm not even gonna lie. So yeah, like he just kind of leads him away. He's like, because Batman understands, he gets it. So he's like, fine, I stopped you. I'm not gonna beat the shit out of you. Let's go. So he leads him away now that he was able to give his wife what he wanted. So that's the end of that particular story. And like I said, even right there, just reading that little part of the dialogue, I was like, it almost got me. It almost got me. Anyway, so we get to the very last story, and this one's more so a New Year's Eve story, so I could have saved this one, but why not? I mean, it's all part of the same time of year, right? So anyway, we see here where we're starting out, and it's the Super Bowl, but Joker interrupts, saying he's interrupting the toilet bowl, and saying that he will not kill anyone. What is it? I have a special New Year's resolution. Starting tonight at midnight, I, your loving Uncle Joker, do solemnly vow not to kill anyone for an entire year. Which means I'm going to have to work extra fast to bump off a few more of you today. So he's saying, like, basically, I can be stopped if Batman is able to stop me before, like, the countdown or whatever. And then he says, so basically I'm asking you, Batman, what are you doing New Year's Eve? So, the commissioner's telling Commissioner Gordon, I don't know why I couldn't think of his last name for a second. Commissioner Gordon is telling Batman, Joker broadcast that message at noon. In 10 hours, we've had 2 shootings and a stabbing, but nothing that smacks of the Joker. So Batman's telling him, like, well, yeah, Joker's not really the type to make idle threats. So he's planning something big, and he wants us to know about it. So that's where they're saying, he gets Commissioner Gordon gets a call, I guess, from his secretary or another officer who's saying like that they have found something. They've gotten like something that seems to be linked to the Joker. So they show up at the crime scene and says the victim is Dr. John Erickson, a pioneer in sonic research. He was working overtime on a special weapons project for the government. So Batman's asking him like, well, what kind of weapon it was, and he says a sort of sonic bomb. Once activated, the device releases waves of hypersound capable of killing anyone within earshot, unless of course they're wearing these special mufflers. So that's where Batman figures out Joker's got the bomb and he's going to use it tonight. And he says he's promised a countdown of victims, and there's no bigger countdown on New Year's Eve than at Gotham Square. So he's already figured out what it is he's going to do, how he's going to do it, and more than likely where he's at. So he's saying like this is like the best spot for him when we see where Joker's like setting up and everything. And he's kind of confident that Batman may not have figured out like what the hint was just yet, but he's saying like Batman usually shows up to foil my plans like at the last minute anyway, so we'll see what happens. So he hands out like the other thing that he's trying to depend upon to like trip up Batman is that he's having his men kind of like hand out Joker masks to everybody so that Batman will show up and not really know who it is. So Batman does show up and he's saying like, well, in this crowd, Joker and his men should stick out like sore thumbs, but he's like, what the? Because all of a sudden he sees all these people like raising hell in Joker masks, including a dog. So of course he's a little bit confused and he's looking around. He says, can't do anything in this mob, so I'll take my chance up here. And that's when he uses his little binoculars and he sees them over there. And the reason that he's able to identify them is because they have all the mufflers on, those earmuffs or whatever. So he knows that that has to be them because everybody else is going to be affected by the sonic bomb. So of course he throws like a battering at Joker, who for some reason was wearing a mask of his own face. And then we see where he starts fighting with like the henchmen and everything as the countdown is beginning. So they start fighting and everything, and then Joker tries to tell him, like, poor Bats, that champagne went right to your head. Now you'll miss the big countdown, because he, like, hit him with the damn thing that holds the champagne in the ice. So Batman's trying to get up, and we see where the fight continues as the countdown is going on. So it keeps going, and then Joker thinks that he's won when it gets down to 1. He starts laughing, and then he sees where the bell is fucking falling down on him. So hits him, and even Batman's just like, oh, shit. So kind of knocks him out. Everybody says Happy New Year, but the bomb has been disabled. Everybody is safe. It's all going to be okay. So that's where we see this bar where there's these guys who are just drunkenly singing, but Commissioner Gordon shows up, so that's kind of like the cue to the bartender, like, all right, everybody has to go. And the guys are even saying like, well, but we want to keep singing. And he's like, well, go practice somewhere else. So he comes up to Commissioner Gordon and tells him like, Happy New Year, but I don't think that your companion is going to make it this year. So he's like, are you kidding? And break, our tradition or whatever. He's like, as a matter of fact, if I'm not wrong, I think that's him walking in right now. So yeah, Batman comes in, they sit down and start having, and a lot of people have seen like this particular panel of them sitting there together. So he's saying, how's the arm and everything? He says, well, better than the Joker's. So he says, close one this time. And then Batman tells him they're all close ones. So Gordon tells him, well, here's to survival. Hopefully we'll be doing this again next New Year's Eve. And Batman's like, yep, hopefully. So Commissioner Gordon turns to Joe, the bartender or whatever, and tells him like, hey, I need like a cheesesteak or whatever to go, and then I think I'm ready. And then he turns around and he's about to tell or ask Batman like anything for you, but he turns around and sees that yes, he's gone and he's left money. So he's like, one of these days I'm going to beat him to paying for the check. But anyway, he tells Joe like Happy New Year, and then he says, and same to you, my old friend. So that's where we kind of get this like last little season's greetings from the creators and people who like work on the show and everything. We got Glenn Murakami, I think Paul Dini's in there. Yeah, Paul Dini, Butch Luchik, Bruce Timm, of course, Dan Reba, like all of the people who worked on the show. And that's where it leaves off. That is the end of this particular anthology. And like I said, I love these stories so much. It's fun for me to reread it every year. Every year I just get a kick out of reading them. I mean, every time it's like the first time, and that's always to me the mark of just like the best possible stories you can get from a comic. You know what I mean? You can read it over and over every time, and it's always fun. It's always entertaining. And that is definitely what this book is. So, I mean, I don't know if anybody out there has ever read this in its entirety. Maybe you've seen like some of the panels or whatever. Like I said, my favorite story is definitely that Mr. Freeze story. Like it gets me every time, every damn time. But Yeah, if you have any thoughts on this particular thing, you have any thoughts on like Christmas stories, you love Christmas comics, do feel free to share those with me down below in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, then definitely make sure to like the video, make sure you're subscribed, hit the notification bell, that way you know when I have new videos coming out for you. And if you'd like to share out this video, well, I do appreciate it because 'tis the season. But if you're done here, then go and read a book, especially this one, however you can find it. But if not, then I will see you on my next video.